So last week we started this piece and we talked about the um, what exactly Nadav and Avihu did that it sounds like from the pasuk, and I'll just jump back up a little bit just so we can see it. Um, but it says the pasuk says in Parshas Mishpatim that these Atzile Bnei Yisrael, which includes Nadav and Avihu, and also the Zakenim, that whatever they did, they were looking at Hashem, Vayiras Elokei Yisrael, and it says that Hashem lo shalach yado vayechazo es Elokim vayochlu vayushtu, and Rashi says that they were chayiv misa, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't want to mix, this a terrible, Simchas Torah with a terrible outcome of seeing that Nadav and Avihu would die. So the Nadav and Avihu, they're we see that they are not they don't face death until later on in the Chanukah Sabayis, where they introduce that Eish Zara. And the Zakenim until the time of the Misonanim with the complainers, and there's a like a Magefa that incorporates that encompasses Bnei Yisrael, including the Zakenim. So they don't get their punishment until later, but we see that they're Chayv Misa all the way at this stage. And so what the Rav Chaim Shmulevitz develops is this idea that these are incredible tzaddikim, but when it comes to the to that type of person who's that close to Hashem, the pasuk in Tehillim says v'sevivav nisara ma'od, that those who are near Hashem can face this incredible storm, this sa'ara ma'od, and meaning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is medaktik im tzadikim kechuta sa'ara, that it can be a hair's breadth. That's how close things can be between mitzvah and avera, and you can suffer something very, very tragic as a result. And what we got up to last week was where Rav Chaim Shmulevitz is sort of broadening this out and talking about Rabbi Akiva, that the Gemara says that Rabbi Eliezer, who's Rabbi Akiva's mentor, his Rebbe, he says Shalcha kashem el shalhen, that your fate is going to be much worse than your colleagues, because even though Rabbi Eliezer was in a nidui, Rabbi Akiva still should have been learning with him, taking the opportunity to learn with him, and because of that Bittul Torah, his fate of that terrible, the terrible death that he faces to the Roman by the hands of the Romans with the iron combs, is much worse than his colleagues faced. And then we see that by Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion, who it says that he was also Osik B'Torah at the time of the Romans, and when the Romans grabbed him, and let's just read this piece in sight, because this is about what we got up to last week. It says Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion Amru Shahayu Osik B'Torah b'Shasa Shmad Ukisha Tafsuhu, and when the Romans were able to catch up with him and get him, Amrulay, they said to him, Asakta be'araisa. They asked him, why are you osek in Torah? Amar lahu ka'asher tzivani Hashem Elokai. He said back to them, I don't adhere to your rules. I listen to the commandments of Hashem, my God. So miyad gazru alav l'sreifa. So the judgment that they came up with was that he should be burnt, which is obviously a very terrible punishment. Upersha Gemara shenigzar alav kain mishum shahaya hoge es Hashem be'osiosav. The Gemara asks, why was he chayiv in streifa? and it answers that it's because that when he was learning, he would actually pronounce either it was the Shem Havaya or the could have been the shame of 42 osios, either way, but he was pronouncing this name that you're not supposed to pronounce. But the Avid Hachi Islamid of it, and even though he said it only to as part of understanding, teaching, that sort of thing, he wasn't doing it for any other purpose. Kedetani lo salamid lasos of ata lamad lahavin laharos. We darshan out from the pasuk that says that by all the abominations that those the Shivas Amamim in Eretz Yisrael are doing, all those abominations they're doing. It says lo salami la. So it's not just that you shouldn't do it, but you shouldn't learn in order to do. And so we darshan from that aval atalamad lahavina laharos, but that you can learn in order to understand and to teach. So in other words, and we see this by Rabbi Akiva and Kshefa, that he learns about the different types of witchcraft. He doesn't learn about it in order that he can do it. He learns about it so that he can teach and understand it. Upirish Rashi is Sham Lisalami Avadumi Okadosh Baruch Hu Medakdek im Tzadikim Kechuta Sa'ara. The Rashi says the problem was that even when you're doing something that's beheter like this, that but Kadosh Baruch Hu, when it comes to the tzaddikim, is still going to be very medakdek, and somehow there is still some kind of a problem with what Rav Chanina ben Tradian was doing, and we'll see that in just a moment. So ein kates l'tvia al adam gadol b'tikun ma'asav. Yeah.
Sorry, there's an obvious reference that is missing here. Why he didn't start with Moshe?
He didn't start with Moshe. Sorry, regarding.
As tzaddik that was punished because that was punished.
Oh, interesting question. That's an interesting question. You're saying, why is it that by the problem of hitting the rock instead of talking to the rock, was that also kechuta sa'ara? That's a really interesting question. He doesn't mention that at all. It almost, it's interesting. It almost seems like there is more to that story. Like maybe that wasn't kechuta sa'ara, that there was more of a problem by Moshe Rabbeinu. I think, that's something that we could probably devote a whole session to, because that's also, it's interesting. By Nadav and Avihu, we see that, many times we're so focused on what we see in Parshas Shmini, where they actually die. Right, and so we think that the whole episode is happening right then and there, when we see that from Parshas Mishpatim that no, there was an issue that happened much earlier. It's simply that the punishment is delayed, and we see the same thing by Moshe Rabbeinu, that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, go to Bnei Yisrael and you're the one who's going to go and save them, and Moshe Rabbeinu makes it sound like they're chaya, there's problems with Bnei Yisrael. Are they really going to be redeemed? And that seems to be a hate as well. So we could probably devote a whole session just understanding this, like how Chatoim sort of, is there an idea of them sort of being megago on each other? Like how does that work, and how does punishment come out? But yeah, I think that you're asking a very good question. By Moshe Rabbeinu, it doesn't seem like it is kechuta sa'ara. Like there seems to be more of a problem. So, but let's shelve that, because I think that'd be a good one to come back to.
Okay. No, I didn't want to take you on a tangent. It's just that's how I learned.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. It's a great question, because it also does seem to be. It seems to be like this, but for some reason it's not. It doesn't seem to be considered to be in the same category. Okay, so in case l'tvia al adam gado b'tikun ma'asav, there's no end to the complaint that can go against a great person in terms of how they're supposed to be working on themselves. And even here, where we see that he had a heter gamor by Rav Chanina ben Tradian to be learning this and be doing this, it still says nevertheless nitva bediktuk shel chuta sa'ara. They should have still been. He still should have had some kind of idea of kavod harab, meaning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'nenash be'onesh chamor shel sreifa. So we still have to understand that a little bit better, but we're going to move on a little bit, and then we'll sort of circle back on this a little bit. Okay, so Od Kasav Rashi. So this is going back to, he's circling back now to Nadav and Avihu, where it says that they were they're peering at God, as it were. This is during Maimet Har Sinai. It says, Ki be'unklos lo pirshu ke ha-tanchuma. Now the Tanchuma is the one that we saw that earlier. We saw that last week, where the Tanchuma is talking about that this is Nadav and Avihu. They're looking at HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the time of korbanos, etc., that they're eating and drinking, But the Uncle says v'chazu yasir kara d'Hashem v'havu chada bekurbanehon yiskablu berava kilu achlin v'shasan. And what Uncle says, though, however, is that they weren't actually eating and drinking, but they were. What were they doing? That they were davening for their korbanos, that they should be mekabel berava beratzon, as if they were eating and drinking from those korbanos. And we saw earlier that the Ramban talks about that the idea that they were eating and drinking means that the pasuk says they were eating and drinking, meaning that the Ramban says that they were eating the korbanos, the korban shlomim, which is what they're supposed to be doing, and it's a Maimad Arsinai. It's a Simchas Torah. They were drinking because ein simcha ela b'basar b'yayin. So there's mitzvahs that were happening. Again, it's mitzvahs that were happening, but there was something that was still not quite right with what Nadav and Avihu were doing, and that's why it's this hair's breadth. But Unglu says not like that. He says they weren't actually eating and drinking. He just says ki'ilu achlin mishasan, that it was as if they were eating and drinking. So Rav Chaim Shmuleva says v'hinei bira in koshav omoku ad ma'od v'lo nitin lekosav. He says this is very difficult for us to understand it, and it's difficult to even write about it. What exactly is going on if you're going to say they weren't even eating and drinking? So what were they doing that was so problematic? So it says ach hama'at sheyesh aleinu lebarer. Be'inyan zehu al pi made isa sham od be'gemara b'maisa de Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion. He says we have to try to understand this with what we were just seeing, this maisa of Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion. V'albito gazru leishev bekuba shel zonos. When it's talking about Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion, it talks about his daughter as well. His daughter also suffered a terrible fate. It says that she was gozer, that they decreed that she would have to be in a brothel. That's where she's going to end up. Damar Rabbi Yochanan, and what led to this terrible decree on the daughter of Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion? So Rabbi Yochanan said one time his daughter, Rav Chanina ben Tradion's daughter, was walking in front of the noblemen of Rome. Amru, they said, "Kama naos piuseho shel ribazu." How beautiful are the strides, or how this girl walks? Miyad, she heard this. Miyad ditaka bepiuseho, and right away, when she hears it, she started to even be more medactic in how she was carrying herself, how she was walking, in order to continue to be even more beautiful in the way that she was doing that. Ula'el medivrei hamasil shishar. Now it says, now in an earlier mimer, Rav Chaim Shmuleva, it's brought down from the Masil Shisharim. It says, Nira shegidole romi shibchuha al tzniusa behilucha. It seems like what the Romans were commenting on was how tznius she was, in the way that she walked, the way that she carried herself. And when she felt that, this praise, she became even more medactic about it. And she was strengthening herself in her own midas atznius. So why was she punished for that? That she took pleasure in that praise that they gave her, and that's what caused her to want to be even more medactic in it, seemingly to even get more praise, in what she was doing. So what happened? She took some of that praise to heart, meaning that she, got enjoyment from that praise from these Roman noblemen. The hanota hana, even if it's a small amount of hana that she received, la'atzmo l'sof nortim mimeno hakol yunsham. He says that from the Mesilas Yesharim, that anytime that we are doing something right, but then we take something of that for ourselves, even a little bit, that we risk losing everything. That we have to be very, very
Jeff,
yeah.
I'm going to sound apicorious here, but thank God I'm not a tzaddik, And I don't want to be with all these requirements.
It's very hard. Yeah, for sure. It is very hard. It's very hard. There's no doubt about it. Like what we're talking about is this chutas. It's a hairbreadth. It's like what's going on? Very difficult to understand. But hold on, hang on in there. Let's see
Okay.
where this goes.
I mean, I hope that there's a reward. I hope that there's a good side of this as well.
Yeah. There is. There's a little bit. There's a little bit. There's something for us to take solace in. He says, "Ubofen zeh yesh lahavin gam es hatvia shinvo nadav aviv as zakenim." So he says, from here we can also try to understand that. But he wants to connect us back to nadav and aviv and even the zakenim. She'im kol aliyasav yitzkorvasum laHashem ba'osa shah nitlu mashu la'atzmam. He says that was the problem also by nadav and aviv. According to Unclus, they didn't even eat or drink. If they had eaten or drink, then he was set up above that they weren't. They're on the one hand, they are gazing at Hashem, but on the other hand, they hadn't quite gotten to the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu, we know, didn't eat for 40 days and 40 nights. He didn't eat, they did. So they weren't quite at the level, yet they were gazing at Hashem. So that was the first shot. And according to that, we could sort of understand, okay, well, we sort of understand that this was a bit more of a problem, what they were doing. But according to Unclus, where they didn't even eat or drink, then you have to go on to something, we have to sort of look at something that's a lot more subtle, like this Maisa of the daughter of Rav Chanina ben Tradion, that they sort of took something for themselves in this. Hamashol shehimsho Unclus ki'ilu achlon v'shosan haynu kishim she'adam she'ocha v'shose af she'osa kein leman kiyum aguf ubriuso. And the mashal here is that when we eat and we drink, even though we're doing it only if we're doing it for the right reasons, we're only doing it so that we are healthy, so that we can continue to be an Eved Hashem and do what we're supposed to be doing. That should be our intent. But mikol makom ne'nehu mikach, but we still get enjoyment from the eating and drinking. And somebody who enjoys a very specific type of food, right? You really love to have whatever it was, your schmaltz herring, you really love it. Says Hari Lo has some maichu oed ela es atzmo. It's not that you love that specific type of food; it's that you love yourself. Bebechinas ma kach haisa af nisalusam shonadav avihu. And in that sort of way, we can understand a little bit more about what the problem with nadav and avihu is. Even though they had elevated themselves to such a high degree, but mixed into that was just a very small amount of this idea of taking some of that pleasure for themselves. And that's why the onesh came in, even a very, very stringent, very chomer type of onesh. So there, afterwards, at the inauguration of the Mishkan, when they brought this Eish Zara, even then the chait was similar to this, as it says, Ish machtehu, each with his own pan. They each did this independently and didn't take counsel from each other. Klomar, each one was only thinking about himself. And they were really sort of thinking about how I personally can be closer to Hashem, but doing it in a way that was perhaps was a little bit too too focused on themselves, a little bit maybe too selfish, something like that. And he wants to connect this idea of Vahaviu to the Chaf Daled Aleph, to the 24,000 Talmidei Rabbi Akiva Shukulam Mesu ben Pesach Latzeros Haya Al Shum Shalo Nagu Kovod Zeh Bezeh Gemara Yavamos. We know that the 24,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva that died between Pesach and Shavuos, the Gemara says that they weren't noheg kavod to each other. That was the problem. But Maharsha says, "V'nira bekavanaso shehapagam haya bezesha kol echad mehem choshav rak al hatzlacha ha'atzmi shelo beruchnius. The problem was that each one of them was very focused on their own ruchnius and on their own success. That was the problem of not being noeg kavod to each other. It was the fact that they were so focused on themselves and not necessarily on the Torah of the other. And that's why they suffered the onish that they did. So he seems to be connecting that with Nadav and Avihu, that when they brought this Ish Zora, that they were also very focused only on themselves and not on each other. They were doing this independently, and they weren't necessarily looking out for each other either. One side note on this is, I think I've mentioned this before, but there's a vort from Rav Aaron Kotler that he talks about when he talks about the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva that died. He says it wasn't really an onesh per se. This wasn't really a punishment. He said the problem was that when you have 24,000 of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, which would have been the progeny of Torah. In other words, they were the ones who were going to carry Torah on to the next generations, right? Rabbi Akiva is where we learn all of our Torah from. It all comes from him. It all comes from his students. So the problem was that if there's a pagam, if there's a problem in the way that they understand Torah and the way that they are teaching Torah and acting and being Torah scholars, that is simply a metzius that cannot be. You cannot have the people who are teaching Torah to have this sort of pagam in them, and therefore not an onesh. It was simply what had to happen. Is the Kadosh Baruch Hu said, "No, this can't be. This is not how Torah can be transmitted. It cannot be transmitted to these people." So it could be that to your point, Mori, is that that idea from Rav Aaron Kotler, maybe also by Nadav and Avihu and others, that the onesh could be that this is a pagam also not only as them as people, as great tzaddikim, but these are also the leaders of the generation, and we need our leaders to be, in some regards, almost perfect. It is a high standard. So how do we deal with that? This high standard. Okay, so now let's look at a little bit of solace here. So he says, "Od Amru b'Gemara of Arazara." This Gemara by Rav Chinin ben Tradion says, "V'al ishto shel Rav Chinin ben Tradion lahariga." His wife also was executed. Why? Al shalo michza biyado. She didn't protest to Rav Chanina. Mikan amru kol misha yesh biyado limchos ve'edo mocha nenash alav. And from here we learn that if you have the ability to be mocha somebody, to tell somebody, hey, what you're doing is not quite right, and you don't do it, you will also receive punishment for not doing that. So So Rav Chaim Shmulevitz asks a very stark question, a bomba kasha, as they say. He says, if the whole thing of Rav Chaim ben Tradion, his whole chait was kechuta sa'ara, it was a hair's breadth. K'mashakasav Rashi Sham, k'mavur, b'kasha, ki al kach haya aleha chiv limchos v'lo od ele sha'al shalo michsa nischai v'hariga. How was she supposed to protest this? This was a chuta sa'ara. How is she supposed to know that what he's doing, even though it's beheter, he shouldn't do it because it's his? How is she supposed to know that? And how is she supposed to do macha on that? How can that be? Even more, how do we understand this? Shahari Rabbi China ben Tradion Megdoli Hador. He was Rabbi China ben Tradion was a gadol, ton of a cutter. She was one of the tanoim. He was a cutter. She was holy. Well, the Rav Gadlus of Kedusha so dikte Kajvarchu imo kechutz hasara shet tzadik kamoso haya alav leizar bedavar shalashar b'nei adam in bo ko ezer. For him, anything that he would do for anybody else would have been complete heter, no isser whatsoever. V'imkin kasha ketza teda hi shabala galon v'gado hador noeg shalo kafi aroy lo bedavar shehu mutter benina. How is she supposed to know that's something that would be completely mutter for anybody else, that he's not supposed to be doing it? So that's a stark question. Like what is going on with this, with the wife of Rav Chaim ben Tradion? So it says in Mikan, Anu lomdim sod gadol b'yitzira. This is a big chiddush, but Rav Chaim Shmulevitz gives us something beautiful here. He says, here we learn an incredible secret in the yitzira, in the creation of the world. Ki ha'isha nivras lios ezer kenegdo. A woman was created to be our ezer kenegdo, labala, to her husband. Ve'aleha mutelas achrayus lasaken lashgiach al halichos bala. It's incumbent upon her. It's her achrayus. It's her responsibility to really be helping to fix and to keep an eye on the way that her husband acts. Tchushas ha'emes livkon is called darchei balav es kol haroi lo lefi ma'alosav dargaso. And the power of being an ezer kenegdo is that she has the sense, almost like it almost sounds like she has like a ruach hakodesh type of sense about her, to understand who her husband is, where he is holding in life, and to understand what he should or should not be doing. Kimishahu achray yesh lo hachush l'recha emes. Anybody, he says, beautiful chiddush here, anybody who has the achrayus, the responsibility on another person, also will have this incredible sixth sense of what the emes is about that person. So we'll finish with this last piece in the last couple of minutes. So he says, Yisod zel yizbar lanu ma'aseh Rabbi Shimon Chalafta. He brings another ma'aseh from the Medrash about Rabbi Shimon Chalafta. Maybe we'll just say it outside because we're almost out of time. That so he was coming home one Erev Shabbos, and there was nothing. The house had nothing for Shabbos. He had nothing, no food, nothing what to eat. So Rav Shimon bar Chalafta goes outside and he pours his heart out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends him a huge, let's say a 10-carat diamond for him, something incredibly valuable. So he goes, takes this to a peddler or something, and he's able to be mefarnes himself to buy for Shabbos. His wife comes home and says, where does all this food come from? He says to her, this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mefarnes us. He gave us parnasa. She said, if you don't tell me where this came from, I'm not going to eat a crumb of it. I'm not eating it. So he tells her the story. She says to him, I'm not eating this anyway until you return that diamond back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And after Shabbos, go return to him. We're not doing this. Why? She says to him, you want your shulchan in Olam Haba to be full, to be empty, and your shulchan in this world to be full. Like, what are you doing? Why are you trading Olam Haba for Olam Hazeh? What are you doing here? So, long story short, he does that, right? He listens to her and says, so we see that there's this idea. She knew that he had an incredible Olam Haba coming to him. And she said, what are you trading it in for? That was her job. That was her job in life, was to be mocha, to have a achrayus on her husband. And so too over here, that the ezer kenegdo of somebody, and we see this by Rav Shimon ben Chalafta, like she knew him, she understood where he was holding, and what he did was not proper. So too that is really the solace of any of the tzaddikim, is their incredible wives. They are not in this by themselves; they're in it with their ezer kenegdo, and she is there to help them sort of steer the ship correctly and to avoid those situations where they might be, going over that hair's breadth a little bit. So it's amazing to think about. It's always a team effort between the great tzaddikim and their wives, and that's really what it takes to keep them sort of steering straight, in the straight and narrow.
Shkar.
So we'll stop here.